It's one of the reasons I'm super active on social media. Like, I'm fired up about this because so many young people are being, and everyone of all ages are being utterly lied to about this. And social media just makes it so much worse. I mean, it's like Instagram is just, it just makes me sick, because what's happening is you have people, and I know some of these people, and they don't actually own that Lamborghini. They're just standing in front of it. They actually have studio sets you can rent in California, so it looks like you're sitting in a private jet, because you're selling your get-rich-quick course. I mean, it's unbelievable what's being peddled to people, and then it leads to them feeling a sense, we call it relative deprivation in psychology. So what happens is we don't define how good we're doing in life based on how much money we actually have. It's not related to that. It's how we compare ourselves to the people around us. That's where we suffer or we feel good. So it's sort of fascinating. It's not really how much money you have. It's where do you see yourself stacking up? And social media just inundates us with all this information that, hey, you know what? You're not doing quite as well as everybody else.
Welcome to episode 63 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Dr. Brad Klontz, who is a founder of the Financial Psychology Institute, an associate professor in financial psychology at Cretin University, a managing principal of Your Mental Wealth, a CFP professional, and a bit of a TikTok star. This episode is all about the intersection of financial psychology and financial planning, which is endlessly fascinating. We talk about why the field of psychology has ignored the topic of money, even though it's one of the biggest sources of stress in people's lives. Dr. Klontz shares how financial trauma and money beliefs can be passed down through generations, and his research on the effectiveness of financial education versus more of a visual, coaching, behavioral finance approach. He also discusses his really interesting research on the psychology behind the ultra-wealthy versus the middle class, and his passion for changing the false messaging on social media about how the wealthy really live. We wrap up talking about a few of his books, which I highly recommend: the Certified Financial Behavior Specialist designation through the Financial Psychology Institute, and listen until the end for his final words on the life-saving power of financial planning. Links, transcript, and timestamps at innovatingadvice.com or directly through the link below. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Dr. Brad Klontz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
We have so much to dive into and talk about. And I first want to hear, I love that you're at this intersection between financial psychology and you're a CFP professional. So how did that come about?
Yeah, boy, those two things don't really go together, do they? Not traditionally, yeah. So I became a clinical psychologist. So I went through all that schooling. I got out of school at age 29. I owed $100,000 in student loan debt. And I grew up lower income, but very frugal parents who really taught me the importance of saving, but didn't really enjoy any wealth themselves. But I was always taught no debt. Okay, so I had this terrified feeling about having all this debt. There was no other way for me to get through school, though. And so it was a really tough thing every time I got the loans, because I was like, it's stacking up. I owed $100,000. And I saw a friend of mine in 1 year make $100,000 trading stocks. And the great thing about this friend is he knew nothing about stocks, just like me. He was a psychologist. He knew nothing. I'd be sitting with him at his computer. He'd be like, I just bought 200 shares of EMC. I'm like, what's EMC? He's like, I don't even know. And he's just clicking the button. And he made $100,000 doing that in 1 year. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a great way for me to get out of debt. So I did what any reasonable person would do in that situation. I sold everything I had of value, and I put it all in the stock market. And I had an incredible 3 months, and then the tech bubble burst.
No.
And I started to watch my money melt away. And I just had, you can imagine the emotions that come up, like, oh no, it's going to come back, right? It's just a dip. Just hold on. Things are cheaper. Buy more. And so I just rode this thing all the way down that terrible, terrible ride. And at the bottom of it, in my misery, I was like, why would a reasonably intelligent person do something so stupid with his money? So that was the question I asked myself, because I'm reasonably intelligent, but I obviously did this terribly stupid thing. And luckily, as a psychologist, we're sort of taught the value of, for lack of a better word, blaming yourself for things, versus blaming the rest of the world, because there's really no juice in blaming everyone else, because essentially there's no growth for you. There's no insight. There's no discovery. And so I was really curious. So why would I do something and so stupid? So I went into the field of psychology. I literally got on my computer. I started doing lit reviews. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna find some studies done on the psychology of money, and it's gonna explain what I did. I'm not gonna do it again. I'm gonna find the right way to do it, and I'm gonna move on. But I came up empty. So the field of psychology at that point had utterly ignored the topic of money. And I've actually done some studies on why that is. But we have a tendency to be money avoidant as a profession, right? So we don't really like rich people. We don't really like money. We're here to help people. So it's this really terrible thing where the field of psychology had totally ignored money, which happened to be the biggest source of stress in the lives of 3 out of 4 Americans. So as psychologists, we're meant to help people deal with stress. Money is the biggest stressor in the lives of 3 out of 4 Americans, yet it's something that you can't talk to a psychologist about. And so anyway, I got really curious about that. So essentially, I became, I would say, like the world's leading expert in the financial psychology after about 3 weeks of me trying to figure out, as a psychologist, why people do what they do around money. And so I went home, I sat down with my mother, and my poor mother, she's been through this many times, where I pull out a notebook, and I start interviewing her about her upbringing and her beliefs about things, because she had to gone through that several times with me in grad school as I'm trying to figure out my own psychology, right? My poor mother. So I found all these stories coming out from my mother, from my grandfather, from my great-grandfather, and it was just profound for me because I'd never heard these stories, but I had all these feelings. I had all these feelings of fear around money, and it's all of a sudden seeing where this came from, it just totally blew my mind, and it made me and all my terrible financial decisions make perfect sense. And then I just frankly became obsessed with doing research on the psychology of money.
Okay, so a few questions. So first of all, why have you discovered that psychologists didn't study money and the impacts?
So one of the things that I've done through the course of my career is I developed something called the Klontz Money Script Inventory. And essentially what we did is we, over 10 years, took down every belief about money that we heard come out of clients' mouths. So we had hundreds and hundreds of them. And then we put them through statistical analysis and gave them to a bunch of people. And essentially, we found 4 categories of money beliefs that seem to be, that exist. And then we looked at those money beliefs and whether they predict success or a lack of success, income, net worth, et cetera. And so what I did is I then took that and I gave it to a bunch of psychologists and mental health providers and compared them to other business people. And what we saw is that people who are drawn to the mental health field have a tendency to be higher in money avoidance type beliefs. The belief that rich people are greedy, money corrupts, that there's virtue in living with less money, like this is somehow virtuous. And so there's this negative association with money and wealth. And so I think that helps explain why we avoid the topic. Which, by the way, is terrible for your own financial health. It's just absolutely terrible, and it leads to a bunch of self-destructive behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you went in and did the research into your own background and your family background, does it almost somehow become genetic, even though it's not literally genetic? But as you're talking about like your grandparents and great-grandparents, does that somehow get down to you and form your money beliefs?
Yeah, there's some actual evidence that trauma experienced in previous generations gets passed down genetically. And so essentially, you don't know the story, but you're walking around with the trauma, which is really, really fascinating. But essentially, yes. So these beliefs around money get passed down through the generations, and you might not even know where the originating event came from. So in our writing, we call them financial flashpoints, these like incredibly emotionally intense experiences we have around money. And I invite your listeners to just think about their own. It's like you've had these things, whether you grew up poor and you didn't have enough, or you saw a relative swoop in and save the day when your parents are about to lose their house, or you saw your parents lose their job. I mean, there's these really profound money memory experiences for people. And in our studies, we found that they lead directly to beliefs around money because we're just trying to make sense of the world, right? Like if you grew up in a lower income family, and the only rich people you saw were kind of mean people or snotty, and you heard stories about people who have money are mean or bad, that you can see how you make that association because you don't have any disconfirming evidence because you don't know any very generous, incredibly giving, wealthy people. And so these beliefs have a tendency to then get reinforced, and then it becomes just the reality you swim in. And what's so interesting is these beliefs, as I said, they predict your income, your net worth, your credit card behaviors, and a whole host of financial behaviors.
Wow. So knowing that psychologists aren't great at dealing with money, do you actually have any research even looking at how financial advisors and financial planners deal with their own money? It can be the do as I say, not as I do.
Yes, so it's interesting. So we have seen that actually they have healthier beliefs around money. Thank goodness.
That's good.
Right?
That's good.
It's really, really good. But they are just as vulnerable to the emotional response related to these financial flashpoint experiences. So, for example, we did a study back in 2008 in the midst of the Great Recession. The stock market was crashing. People were in full panic mode. And we looked at post-traumatic stress symptoms in financial planners. And we saw that over 90% of the people that we surveyed had moderate to severe levels of post-traumatic stress they were experiencing in the midst of that crisis. And so as advisors, we're not immune to this. And actually, I think we need to be much more conscious of it than the average person because we're not only just talking about our money, it's our parents' money, it's our best friend's money, it's our clients that we really love. And so I think it's a mistake to think that we are not vulnerable to some of those emotional experiences because we absolutely are. And sometimes it's even more exaggerated because there's so much more at stake for the people we care about.
Yeah. So what should advisors be doing to do that work on themselves first?
Well, first of all, I think doing that work on themselves is incredibly important. And it's something that I certainly promote in my writing. And essentially, it's looking at your own beliefs around money and where they came from and shining a light on this. Because what's so interesting is money is a taboo topic. So we don't really talk about it. So there's not a lot of experiences and opportunities for us to examine our thinking, to think about our thinking about money. And so I think it's just incredibly valuable to do that. And so just even questions like, what was it like for you growing up in terms of your socioeconomic status? How did you feel about it? Did you feel proud? Did you feel embarrassed? Did you feel guilty? What did your mother teach you about money? So what 3 things did she teach you about money? What about your father? What 3 things did he teach you about money? What is your happiest money memory, your worst money memory, your earliest money memory? These are just examples of questions that will help you shine a light into your relationship with money, which in our studies, this is way more important than financial literacy in terms of shaping your behavior.
Because then it probably shifts from the financial literacy and education is kind of the knowing things, but now we get into the doing. Right? And how are you doing and interacting and what actions are you taking or are you not taking?
I would love your opinion on this because this is what I observe. I think that the biggest problems in the lives of Americans around money are actually super simple and everybody already knows better. So the biggest problems I see are people spending too much and not saving enough for the future. And I've yet to meet somebody who's that's due to a lack of financial literacy. Everyone I know, I've never met anyone who's oh, really? I didn't know I was supposed to do that. And so that's my problem with financial literacy. It's I think that the 2 biggest problems everybody already knows. So what exactly are we educating them on? What do you think about that?
Well, that's spot on. And that's kind of a conversation that I've been having with people. And I actually kind of was recently having a conversation around why are we seeing this shift towards coaching and to having deeper conversations. And somebody asked, like you just did, what is my opinion on that? And I kind of said, look, as we look around, clearly what we've been doing isn't working, whether it's on the financial literacy side or even, I'm going to say, on the financial advice and financial planning side, giving someone a document of, hey, you need to get life insurance, you need to save in your retirement plan, you need to spend less. Like you just said, these are all things people are like, yeah, I know, but guess what? 6, 12, 18 months later, they still haven't done it. So clearly something that we're doing isn't working. So we are seeing this shift towards coaching. And so I'll throw it back to you. Do you have any research on how coaching leads to behavior change?
Yeah, so actually the study that I'm the most excited about that I've ever done came out a few months ago in 2019. And what we did is we did a double-blind randomized control trial. Okay, so which is a lot of junkety junk that says that, oh wow, this is a good study. That's all you got to think about. But it's designed basically, essentially the way you would design a medical study, deciding on which treatment is more effective. We ran it in 5 different cities across the country, and we put half the people in a financial education seminar where we taught them about the importance of savings, about all the right ratios, the cash equivalents. I mean, all the stuff that you would imagine that you would educate somebody on, why they should save and how to go about saving more. The other group, we didn't talk about any of that stuff. We didn't talk about any financial literacy stuff whatsoever. What we talked about was money scripts, like we just talked about, beliefs around money. I had people create really exciting visual representations of why they would save to begin with. Like the idea is we have to override this natural inhibition we have to, we're all wired to just try to enjoy the moment right now. And I can prove it to you, like in terms of weight, right? Like your impulse is to eat sugary fat things and as much as possible. And our impulse is to actually not move around much. It's sort of like, this is the way that we're wired. And so we're asking ourselves to not do that, to delay gratification for what exactly? And so it tends to be extremely abstract for people, financial goals. And you can't motivate yourself with abstractions. So this is the way our brain works. So we got people to get really excited about their goals, to create essentially vision boards around their goals. And then we asked them to track, we asked them when we started, like, how much are you saving for your goals as a percentage of gross income? And then a month later, we asked them the same thing. And so 2 groups, one in a financial education seminar for 1 hour, one in a group where they got them all excited and we put all the financial psychology stuff in there. And what we saw is the financial literacy group increased their savings by 22%. Which, by the way, is pretty good. That's pretty incredible, huge. Actually. The financial psychology group, though, 73% increase in how much they were saving. Yes. So they went, on average, the one group went from about 10 to 12%. The other group went from 10 to 17% of their income because they were so fired up about why they were saving. We attached it to their values, like why it really meant, what it means to them. And it led to radical financial change. And we didn't educate them anything about what you actually need to do with it. They just were like, they were unstoppable. We got them fired up about why they would save to begin with. And that's ultimately, I think, where the coaching, to answer your question, I think that's where the coaching is so incredibly important because people already know kind of what they need to do. I mean, the biggest problems in the US aren't not knowing the difference between a traditional versus a Roth IRA. I mean, that's not where we're tripping up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating and awesome. And it so gets back to like bringing the why into why would people do something? Yeah, they know they should spend less and save more, but I don't know, that's just not exciting. Just like telling me I shouldn't be eating dark chocolate and drinking wine every night. Not exciting.
Absolutely. So a hack that your listeners can use right away, whether with their clients or themselves, is to get extremely specific about a goal. So don't ask the client, when do you want to retire? I mean, that's an okay question, but how about paint a picture of your ideal retirement for me? Like, where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? So now what we're doing is we're making this visual. We're starting to motivate the part of the brain that actually gets you to do things. And it's not the part of your brain that's like, oh, I don't know, abstraction about retirement. It's the emotional connection to the retirement. Because people have associations with it. You have no idea what it is. Like somebody might have an association with when you retire, you stop working and now you're useless and you might as well die. Right? So some people actually have that association. So as you're sitting there talking about retirement and then you're wondering why they're not taking the steps, well, maybe it's a terrible idea for them on an emotional level. It's not something they've really thought about. So you can catch that right away when somebody's like, well, I don't know. And then you're like, oh, whoa, stop. This is super important. Like we need to really we're asking you to do all this stuff. What's the point? We need something super exciting on the other end. So let's talk about that. And what you'll run into are some of these beliefs around retirement that you have a chance to change and say, oh, wow, well, so I have some clients. Here's an example. Oh, well, I have some clients who actually, look at retirement as sort of the next phase of their evolution. And they might, they're just not as anxious about their day job. They get to go create this other thing and do this other thing and express themselves in these other ways. So essentially redefining retirement for somebody who might be incredibly intelligent, but they've just never thought about this. They've never talked about it. And so that's the opportunity. And so the more you can build that incredibly exciting emotional vision, the better. Another little hack is to actually name your financial goals. So instead of retirement, maybe it's a financial freedom fund, right? Or instead of a savings account, it's a 2024 family reunion in Europe account, or naming your child's educational accounts, because we attach value to that, and it's so much harder to go steal from it. You know what I mean? It's really easy to steal from an amorphous savings account to go buy a new boat. But when it's like, my son's name is Ethan's college fund, I'm gonna tell you what, I'm not gonna take $1 from that, because I love my son and I want him to go to college. And so hacks like that are incredibly powerful.
So a lot of what you're saying and talking about is visual. And you've mentioned the vision board and creating this visual of what your goals in future look like. And I'm an incredibly visual person. But what we do a lot in financial planning is so data driven. And I've talked with a lot of planners that say, oh no, I work with, I'll just say engineers, and they just like the data and they look at the numbers and they want the charts. As humans, though, we are wired to respond and connect with stories, which are always visual. So when we think about engaging with clients and helping people on this journey and moving more towards this coaching, are all humans visual thinkers, and do they respond visually, or are there some that truly are that, nope, I just want the data and the numbers, and what do the numbers tell me?
Well, I think some people want both. And so, so I've already framed it like that, right? I think they need both. And so, for example, we did a similar thing with a traditional 401k sign-up meeting. So essentially, we worked with Mutual of Omaha. They're like, we redesigned their 401k sign-up meeting. So instead of the charts and ETF graphs, we essentially did very similar things. We put on music. Everyone got a little stuffed animal. We did this with like a group of truckers too. And so just before the experiment, the experimenters were like, oh, geez, these guys are going to kill us. Abort. We're not going to do it. We're giving them stuffed animals, right? And they created little sticker board visions of their goals and all this. And we saw a 33% increase in 401k savings, and immediately, because people got attached to these goals. And so I think, some clients want to see the charts, and they absolutely do. And so of course do that. But also do this other thing. Make sure they're properly motivated to execute on achieving these goals.
And when we think about sort of working with different types of clients, ultra wealthy versus middle class, people are creating more solutions for lower income, or the Henrys of the world. You've done some research on the psychology behind ultra wealthy versus middle class. What did some of that show?
Yeah, so that is some really exciting research for me personally. As I mentioned, I grew up in lower income culture, and very early on, I realized that the word culture actually is a pretty good description, where it's like they're totally different cultures. And I'm talking about people who have the same ethnicity, but they're just in different cultures. They look at the world very differently. And so I got extremely interested in that. And so one of the studies I did was with Paul Sullivan in the New York Times, and we looked at about 1,000 ultra wealthy people and middle class people, and we ran analyses on a bunch of different variables on how they look at the world differently and how they spend differently. And what's so fascinating for me is there's all these myths about what ultra wealthy people do that the middle class and working class and lower income people have that just do not fit reality. And the problem is that these myths will keep you from becoming successful. And so, for example, what we saw in the ultra wealthy people was around spending habits. So the ultra wealthy people had about 10 million in net worth, and we compared them to a group of people that had about 500,000 in net worth. So they're doing pretty good, right? But we compared them to people who are ultra wealthy. And what we saw is that the ultra wealthy had 18 times more money, but they only spent twice as much on things like, well, specifically houses, vacation, cars, and watches. So we have this fantasy, middle class and lower income have this fantasy that ultra wealthy people are just buying Lamborghinis and Rolex watches, but absolutely not. That's actually not what the vast majority of them are not doing that at all, because the only way to become wealthy is to actually not spend like that. It's sort of ironic. Like if that's your mindset, like that's how you're going to spend, you're actually not going to become wealthy. So it makes sense that and most of them were self-made, by the way. Most of them went to public school. Most of them weren't born rich. That's another myth, right?
Wow.
I think the studies show about 88% of millionaires in the United States are self-made in the sense, not obviously they probably had help along the way, but they weren't born rich. They were born middle class or lower, but they found the right mindset and the right opportunities, and there they went and they climbed that ladder. And so anyway, just as an example, and another one that came out in the study that was pretty profound is, and this is a sticking point, and I know you've worked with middle class people, and this is a huge one, because it is so difficult. Like I call it do-it-yourself-itis. Like middle class, look, it's like you just got to do it yourself, right? I mean, your car breaks down, your uncle knows how to fix cars, your aunt knows how to do your taxes. I mean, this is how I grew up. We all help each other.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things that is so difficult, I was just talking to somebody yesterday who just has a bunch of success, and this is just so hard for her, is to actually get expert advice. So to actually sit down with a CPA or an estate planning attorney or a financial planner. And I tell people too, you don't need to hire them and put them on staff. You can just pay for an hour of their time until you can afford more of their time. But just getting that expert advice is a huge mental barrier for a lot of middle-class individuals, but it's just what all the ultra-wealthy people do. It's like they know that, like, ultra-wealthy people don't suffer from the illusion that they're going to be able to day trade their way to success or going to be stock pickers, whereas the middle-class and lower-income, this is actually how they think they're going to become wealthy. And as you know, it actually leads to them losing their money, like my experience that I talked about.
Yeah. Well, and I had one, memory that will always stick with me. I went to university for a while in Santa Barbara and went down to Rodeo Drive one day with friends and just started talking with a security guard who was on a break at, one of the super fancy stores, and just got in this fascinating conversation with him. And he's like, look, the people that come into this store and on Rodeo Drive, with no makeup on, and they're in their sweats and flip-flops, those are the people that are going to come in and spend $20,000. The people that come in the 3-piece suits just come in and look around because they actually bought it at 75% off at the outlet mall, up the freeway, and they just come down here to feel rich. And it was just so fascinating, just this guy that's worked down there for so long. And we got in this whole conversation, like you just said, around the psychology behind all of it. And so how can you untrain yourself?
Oh, it is so difficult. And it's one of the reasons I'm super active on social media. Like, I'm fired up about this because so many young people are being, and everyone of all ages are being utterly lied to about this. And social media just makes it so much worse. I mean, it's like Instagram, it just makes me sick, because what's happening is you have people, and I know some of these people, and they don't actually own that Lamborghini. They're just standing in front of it. They actually have studio sets you can rent in California, so it looks like you're sitting in a private jet, because you're selling your get rich quick course. I mean, it's unbelievable what's being peddled to people. And then it leads to them feeling a sense, we call it relative deprivation in psychology. So what happens is we don't define how good we're doing in life based on how much money we actually have. It's not related to that. It's how we compare ourselves to the people around us. That's where we suffer or we feel good. So it's sort of fascinating. It's not really how much money you have. It's where do you see yourself stacking up? And social media just inundates us with all this information that, hey, you know what? You're not doing quite as well as everybody else, across everything. Like, oh, wow, look at that lovely couple, they're sitting together, cuddling up, with some hot cocoa in the middle of the pandemic. And here my wife and I are fighting, I'm single, or, my kids are on the iPad, and, oh, look at that parent's doing an art project with their kid. I mean, just all these things just make us feel terrible about ourselves. But all that content is curated, and a lot of it is designed to make you feel deprived so that you'll buy whatever they're selling. But I think social media has just made it so much worse. And so one of the things that I do on social media is I try to educate people on what actual wealthy people do. If you want to become wealthy, you actually need to have a savings mindset, right? I mean, you can't get there otherwise. It's not about how much money you make. It's how much money you set aside so that it grows to help meet your goals. And so I'm actually full force trying to put out that content every single day. But I got to tell you, it's super difficult.
And one of the places you put out a ton of that content is on the crazy platform of TikTok. So how did you get involved in TikTok?
So I have two 14-year-old nephews, and I think it was about a year and a half ago, they're showing me this new platform, and it's TikTok. And you get on there, and it's like these 15-second videos, and they're really compelling, and they're to music and people lip syncing and dancing, and it's quite hypnotic. And as we discussed before the show, a little bit disgusting, like with some of the content that goes on there, but it's a bit hypnotic. And so I came back home, and I had downloaded the app, and I went on there again, and I was looking, and I started to see these day traders pop up. And I got to be honest with you. So I just talked to you about my story. I thought they went extinct, back in the tech bubble. I hadn't even heard about it since then. But then, of course, I'm like, oh my gosh, we've had the biggest bull run in history. Of course they're back. because everyone lost everything back then, lost their house, had to go back and get their, so I thought there was this cultural event like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore, because all the data on day trading is just horrific too.
Yes.
Actually, sports gambling, I think you have a better shot at. So I was so appalled by it, because I knew that, first of all, these are my nephews, they're 14. They're the ones watching this stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is an entire generation is going to be fed this poison around this is how you become wealthy and this is how wealthy people do things. Oh. And so that's what drove me on the platform. I'm like, no, I am going to start making content, trying to show people what actually happens, with somebody who actually is an expert, who has credentials, who isn't just day trading in their mother's basement, because I just saw the profound impact this was likely to have on young minds. And that's what got me on there. I was upset.
Yeah. And so a lot of it is kind of, like I said, debunking the myths of the wealthy also, right? Going back to sort of that ultra wealthy versus middle class and what we see on social media and the Lamborghinis and private jets.
Yeah, my most popular video series just in the last few weeks, and I'm talking like 1.3 million views I'm getting on these things, which is just ridiculous, right? It's crazy. It says, welcome to the real millionaire TikTok, because what happens is, it's going up against videos where people are in those Lamborghinis and getting out of helicopters or whatever the heck they're pretending to be doing, frankly. And so what then pops up is, whoa, me, all of a sudden, well, what's this? Oh, wait, look, he's riding his bike to work. Because I ride my bike to work, Yeah. It's like, oh, what? He took his kid tubing. The tube cost $26. And essentially I'm showing people, he drives a Toyota, not a Lamborghini. And essentially what I'm showing people is that true wealth is actually owning your time, essentially, right? That's true wealth, is when you can own your time. Yeah. And also ultra wealthy people, like self-made ones, that if they're bought into the trappings of the Rolex watches, that kind of thing, as we discussed previously, they never get there. Because you're always looking to buy that next thing as soon as you get some money, and it's lifestyle inflation. You're never taking chips off the table. And those people aren't the ones who end up having that ultra high net worth.
Okay, so for all the people, and I'm going to include myself in this, that are super keen to learn more and advisors that want to upskill. So you've got 5 books, but I want to start with 2 of them. The Wired for Wealthy, Change the Money Mindset, change the money mindsets that keep you trapped and unleash your wealth potential. And this is where you dive into a lot of those money scripts.
Yep, that's right. And so there I start talking about, the top 10 money scripts that mess up people's financial lives, as well as our general philosophy around financial psychology and how to unwind those.
And so was that book originally geared towards consumers? Is it geared towards advisors? Is it kind of just good for everyone?
Yeah, I think it's good for everyone. Of course, that's what every author says, right? You're like, oh, my book is great for every human being on earth. But it's definitely geared towards consumers. So it's not a professional book.
Yeah. And then Mind Over Money, Overcoming the Money Disorders That Threaten Our Financial Health.
Yep, that's a newer book. And so we wove more of the research on the brain research that's coming out and how we interact with money related to that. And the big difference for my work is, so I teach behavioral finance. So I do teach that. But my focus is on financial psychology because for me, I'm much more interested in what it was actually like for you growing up. Like, what did your parents teach you? We all have these cognitive biases that screw us up. It's human nature. So that's the field of behavioral finance. And it's interesting. But my focus is really on you as the individual and how, and on the professional side, how can we shape your behaviors and beliefs around money?
Again, I would imagine that that's good for everyone, breaking the rule, but.
Yep, I think it is. So I use that in some of my classes at Creighton. The text that is used the most in the financial planning world, and I think it's being used in about 15 universities right now to train financial planners, is called Facilitating Financial Health. And in that book, we have taken what we know from the field of psychology to help shape behaviors and applied it to the financial planning world.
Well, one of the things I'm thinking about is there was an article that came out, I have no sense of time anymore, so a few years ago, on people that work on Wall Street and live in Manhattan, how they can't even get by on $1 million salary. And it's because they had to have that, super high-end apartment and drive the fancy car, even though you live in Manhattan, and have the $800 suits all the time. So, even if they're not sort of the retail advisors and planners, we do see that, among the advisor planner community of, hey, if I'm going to show up to a client's house, or if I'm going to have clients in my office, I have to be in the expensive outfits with the nice car.
And if you think you're immune to this, you are lying to yourself. Because I know we all sit back and go like, oh, that's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
You know, this stuff creeps in there though, because your brain is wired to exist within a tribe. This is how your brain has evolved. So you are so vulnerable to this. And so you move to a new area and it's going to start creeping in. Things you've never thought about. You know, I had this experience. So I do this for a living and I was living on Kauai. I was on Kauai for 20 years. And all of a sudden I just realized, I was telling my wife, you know, we need a truck. You know, we need to get a pickup truck. And I had all this rationale that was very, very well designed because I'm a smart person, right? And so I designed this rationale and it made a lot of sense. And literally, as I'm driving this thing, after purchasing it, I'm looking around and everybody has a 4-door Toyota pickup, Tacoma. And I'm sitting there driving home going, oh my gosh, you know, this just happened to me, right? And so wherever you go, there's what's expected that you wear, what you drive, where you eat. And this creeps into your subconscious. And then before you know it, you're convincing yourself that, of course, I need to get, you know, this particular thing. And you'll have this entire rationale related to it. And the unfortunate part is it might have nothing to do with your actual financial goals or your actual financial situation. So in our studies, we call it the financial comfort zone. And so it's this culture, it's the way you look at the world. And we all get stuck in one of these. And it can be really devastating. And for people who actually want to increase their net worth, they have to look at it like there's an entire other universe on how to look at money and how to approach money and interact with money. And if I want to move either frankly up or down the socioeconomic spectrum and be happy, I need to learn about that culture and how they look at money.
So for people that want to learn more, you are also the co-founder of the Financial Psychology Institute.
That's correct. So there we do, we have training groups for financial planners. We have something called the Executive Circle. We meet a couple times a month. We unleashed that during the midst of the pandemic because we're all trapped inside and we wanted to find ways to continue our interaction. And there we have a certified financial behavior specialist designation that basically advisors can use if they have had training in this area. So the other thing I do is I'm a professor in financial psychology at Creighton University, where we have a graduate certificate in financial psychology and behavioral finance. It's also interesting to get an MBA with an emphasis in financial psychology at Creighton, which is super, super exciting. Wow. And so it's just a great place and a fun place for me to teach because when you do research, it's like, you know, nobody cares about your study, okay? But my students, they have to care because I grade them. Yeah. And so it's a fabulous way for me to like share this research with people who just have to pay attention.
So who would be kind of the ideal person, and knowing that the audience is financial advisors and financial planners, for getting that certified financial behavior specialist designation?
So most of our students are, I would say, financial planners. So many of them are practicing already. I'd say most of them are actually. Most of them are probably like mid-career on average. So financial planners who realize that financial planning has evolved beyond just setting up portfolios for people. And, you know, there are some threats in our industry related to this. I mean, everybody knows about it. You know, as investing becomes more of a commodity, it's like, you know, how can we help people? And what's so exciting for me is this is actually how you should have been helping people and how you provide the most value for people. Like, yes. Look, we just said that financial stress is the biggest source of stress in the lives of Americans, and financial stress kills people. Like, it literally kills people. There's studies done that it's just as deadly as heart disease and cancer. Like, it kills people. So I look at, and who do you go to get help for this? It's financial planners. So I actually have this mission as a financial planner and this way of looking at it. Like, look, you're here not to just help people, but actually save lives and make lives better. So I feel really passionate about that. And so in order to help people shift behaviors, though, you really have to have a skill set that frankly hasn't been taught in traditional financial planning. Now, the great news is that there's more and more movement in that direction. So the CFP board is actually putting energy into this. They're realizing that, hey, look, you know, they just came out with a book called Client Psychology, was one of the last books written by the CFP board. And fortunately, I was able to contribute a few chapters to it, but I think they're looking for ways to put this in the curriculum. So by the way, this is the future of financial planning, is how can we be more holistic servers of our client and look at their entire lives? And to me, that's where the opportunity is, because again, people don't go to therapists to talk about their money stress because therapists are stressed about talking about money.
So in the curriculum for the certified financial behavior specialist, is it that then looking at the money scripts, and you mentioned kind of the research that you've talked about, so diving more into that to understand the differences in psychology?
Yeah, so we have several main content areas. So one is looking at what is financial psychology. So as I talked about, the intersection between these financial flashpoints, money scripts, our money behaviors. And for that course, I actually essentially do financial therapy on all the students, right? So they have to write their own money story, and they have to think about their own money scripts. And I think it's, to your point, I think it's incredibly important that you know your own psychology around money. And then we have a course very much, the entire course is focused on communication technologies. So using things like motivational interviewing, like somebody who's resistant to change, what techniques can I use to get them to move forward, for example, on getting a will when they're somehow resisting it or not following through in my financial advice, which is a universal experience for financial advisors. Yeah. Every client, there's something that's a sticking point for them. They're not ready to move on. So what can we do for that? We have a course that's focused on family financial psychology and couples financial psychology, because many of us work within family systems. So we have parents who are worried about their kids. We have trusts that are perhaps enabling bad behavior in some people or less optimal behavior. We have couples who are in conflict around money. Have you ever met one of those? They're not on the same page, right? It's sort of universal. And so these are the situations that we run across. And so that course is focused on that. And then we have one that's focused on behavioral finance, the cognitive biases. But all of our courses are focused on, great. So there's a confirmation bias. Got it. What am I supposed to do with that? You know, so there's a client in my room and they're exhibiting this. What am I supposed to do with it? So it's one thing to know about it, know that it exists, which is important, but it's not really helpful if you're in the room with somebody who's exhibiting it. What am I supposed to do in that situation? How can I help this person and not hurt them?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's been one of my challenges with when I first started learning about behavioral finance like 10 years ago. I was like, okay, I was reading all this stuff and I was like, but I'm just not clear what I do with that. So that is...
I laugh because you know what I do in my course? I illustrate this point by explaining, for example, what a confirmation bias is. So confirmation bias, essentially, you believe something and you're going to find all the evidence to prove yourself right. And you're going to ignore all the other. So I tell people just sort of jokingly, like, okay, great. So what I want you to do is the next time you have a conversation with your spouse and they're exhibiting a confirmation bias, just go ahead and tell them. Just go ahead and tell them that that's what's happening. It's like, so sweetie, I know that you're upset that I didn't wash the dishes. And it seems like you're just looking for evidence, though, to show that I'm not a very good partner. I think you have a confirmation bias because you're going to get, it's not going to go well, okay? And you're not going to be helpful at all. And so that's where we stumble in terms of behavioral finance. So for example, our course is all focused on, like, there's techniques. So you run across this, what are you supposed to do? Like when you see that because telling people about their biases is a great way for them to fire you and for you not to be helpful at all.
Yeah. Fascinating. So I assume this is available online, and I know you've got these certificates around the world. So it's something that's open to everyone?
It is. So at the Financial Psychology Institute, we, like I mentioned, the Executive Circle, that's online training. People can access right away. At Creighton University, that's a whole nother deal. It's like you got to go to graduate school, right? You got to take 5 classes. So that's a different level of commitment, I would say. Yeah. But yeah, it's all the programs are online. So I'm very fortunate with that. I've been teaching online for over 10 years now.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Brad, thank you so much for being here. You clearly have a full schedule with teaching and endless videos on TikTok. I know you're on the other social media platforms. So thank you for spending time with us today, for inspiring us. Any final words on the future of financial planning or calls to action?
I think the opportunity for financial planning is to really engage with the concept that we are there to help people much more holistically. We're their financial life advisor, if you will. It's almost like you're going to be walking with them through life around the issue that is the most stressful for most people. Yeah. And so it's not just about putting them in a portfolio and sitting down at meetings and running over performance reports every quarter. I mean, go ahead and do that. But if that's where you're staying, you're really missing out on an opportunity to be, in one of my articles, I called it a financial health physician, right? I mean, a healer in essence. Like hopefully this doesn't creep you out. I mean, it's like you're essentially in a position to help basically extend people's lives and the quality of their lives, because you are the one who is bringing the knowledge and the tools to help them navigate the thing that is the most stressful in their lives. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful opportunity. It's one of the reasons I love financial planning. And I would just encourage everyone to embrace that mission.
That's fantastic. I love that. It kind of gave me goosebumps. That was such a powerful way of putting it. Awesome. Brad, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. If you're wondering where to start, head to innovatingadvice.com/start for a short video series walking you through 3 steps to identify opportunities for innovation in your financial advice or financial planning business. Again, that's innovatingadvice.com/start.